Sarah's eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar ceiling tiles and the soft beeping of medical equipment. The room smelled of antiseptic and fresh flowers, a strange combination that made her stomach turn slightly. As consciousness slowly returned, she became aware of a dull ache in her head and the feeling that something was terribly wrong. A gentle hand touched her shoulder, and she turned to see a man in a white coat sitting beside her bed. He had kind brown eyes and salt and pepper hair, probably in his early 40s. There was something familiar about his face, but she couldn't quite place him. "Sarah, thank God you're awake," the man said, relief evident in his voice. "I was so worried. The accident was terrible, but you're going to be okay." She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry and scratchy. The man quickly reached for a cup of water with a straw and helped her take small sips. The cool liquid felt wonderful against her parched throat. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, though the words came out as barely more than a croak. The man's face fell slightly, and he exchanged a worried glance with a nurse who had just entered the room. "Sarah, it's me. It's David, your husband." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Husband?" She stared at this stranger claiming to be her husband, searching her memory for any trace of recognition. Nothing. The last thing she clearly remembered was being with Marcus, her boyfriend of 3 years. They had been fighting about something, she couldn't remember what, but she remembered the anger in his dark eyes and the way he had stormed out of their apartment. "I don't understand," she said, her voice growing stronger but filled with confusion. "I don't know you. Where's Marcus? We live together on 5th Street and he drives that old blue Honda. He should be here." David's expression grew more concerned and he gently took her hand. She noticed a gold wedding band on her ring finger that she didn't remember putting there. The sight of it made her panic and she tried to pull her hand away, but David held it firmly but gently. "Sarah, you've been in a coma for 6 weeks," David explained carefully. "You were in a car accident. The doctor said you might have some memory loss, but they hoped it would be temporary. Marcus isn't part of your life anymore. We've been married for 2 years. The room seemed to spin around her. 2 years. That was impossible. She remembered Marcus clearly. Remembered their tiny apartment with the leaky faucet and the neighbor's cat that always sat on their fire escape. She remembered planning their future together, talking about getting married someday when they had enough money saved up. "This can't be real," she whispered, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I remember everything about Marcus. We were going to look at apartments last weekend. He bought me that bracelet with the little heart charm for my birthday last month." David's face was patient but sad. "Sarah, your birthday was 8 months ago. You haven't worn that bracelet in over 3 years. I know this is confusing and frightening, but I'm here for you. We'll get through this together." A doctor entered the room, a middle-aged woman with short gray hair and a reassuring smile. She introduced herself as Dr. Peterson and began asking Sarah questions about what she remembered. As they talked, Sarah learned that she had apparently suffered retrograde amnesia, losing several years of memories due to the traumatic brain injury from her accident. According to the medical records and David's account, Sarah had met him 4 years ago at a hospital charity event where she had been working as a volunteer coordinator. Marcus had become increasingly controlling and possessive, leading to their breakup 3.5 years ago. She had moved out of their shared apartment and eventually found happiness with David, marrying him in a small ceremony 2 years prior. But none of this felt real to Sarah. In her mind, Marcus was still the man she loved, still the person she was building a future with. The thought of him being controlling seemed impossible. Marcus had always been protective, yes, but never controlling. He loved her and she loved him. "I want to see Marcus," she told David firmly. "I need to talk to him. He must be so worried about me." David's jaw tightened slightly and she caught a flash of something in his eyes that might have been anger or fear, but it passed so quickly she wondered if she had imagined it. "Sarah, that's not a good idea right now," David said carefully. "You need to focus on recovering. The doctors say it's important not to overwhelm you with too much information at once. Let's take this one day at a time." But Sarah's determination was growing stronger. If she was really married to this man, if her entire life had changed so dramatically, she needed to understand what had happened. She needed to fill in the gaps in her memory, and Marcus was the key to understanding her past. That evening, after David had gone home to get some rest, Sarah asked the night nurse if she could use a phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed Marcus's number, a number she knew by heart even though everyone insisted it was years out of date. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello? Marcus?" She whispered, tears flowing freely now. "It's me. It's Sarah." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was strange, cautious. "Sarah, where are you calling from? I heard about the accident, but they wouldn't let me see you. Your husband said you needed space to recover." "Marcus, I don't remember him. I don't remember being married. The last thing I remember is our fight and you leaving the apartment. What happened to us? Why aren't we together anymore?" Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was filled with emotion. "Sarah, there's so much you don't know. So much that happened after. I need to see you. There are things about David, about what really happened that you need to know before it's too late." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at the phone in confusion and growing fear. What had Marcus meant about David? What things did she need to know? And why did everyone seem so determined to keep them apart? The next morning brought a parade of visitors that Sarah didn't recognize, all claiming to be close friends and family members from her supposed new life. David had returned early, bringing fresh flowers and a photo album filled with pictures of their apparent relationship and marriage. Sarah studied the photographs carefully, seeing her own face smiling back at her from what seemed like someone else's life. There she was at dinner parties, on vacation trips, at their wedding ceremony. In every photo she looked happy, but the woman in these pictures felt like a stranger. The clothes were different from her usual style, more expensive and conservative. Her hair was shorter and professionally styled instead of the long, casual waves she remembered having. "You changed a lot after we got together," David explained, noticing her confused expression as she stared at a photo of herself in an elegant cocktail dress. "You said you wanted to grow as a person, to leave your old life behind and start fresh." One visitor particularly caught Sarah's attention, a woman in her 30s with bright red hair and a warm smile who introduced herself as Jennifer, supposedly Sarah's best friend. Jennifer seemed genuinely emotional about Sarah's recovery, crying as she hugged her and talking about how worried everyone had been. "Sarah, honey, you have no idea how scared we all were," Jennifer said, squeezing her hand. "David barely left the hospital for the first 2 weeks. He loves you so much." But when David stepped out to speak with the doctors, Jennifer's demeanor shifted slightly. She leaned closer to Sarah and lowered her voice. "I know you don't remember me, but I need you to know that I've been worried about you for a long time," Jennifer whispered. "Even before the accident. You changed so much after you married David, and not always in good ways. You stopped calling me as often, stopped going out with friends. You said David preferred you to focus on your marriage and his career." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "I probably shouldn't be telling you this while you're recovering, but Marcus called me. He's desperate to see you. He says there are things about David that you discovered right before the accident. Things that made you question everything about your marriage." Before Sarah could ask more questions, David returned with a nurse who announced it was time for Jennifer to leave so Sarah could rest. As Jennifer gathered her purse, she slipped a small piece of paper into Sarah's hand. "If you need anything, call me," Jennifer whispered, "day or night." After Jennifer left, Sarah unfolded the paper to find a phone number and a brief message. "Marcus is staying at the Riverside Motel, room 237. He has something important to show you." That afternoon, while David was in meetings at the hospital where he apparently worked as a cardiovascular surgeon, Sarah convinced a young nursing assistant to help her get dressed and wheelchair her down to the lobby for some fresh air. Instead of staying in the lobby, she asked the assistant to call her a taxi, claiming she needed to pick up some personal items from home. The taxi ride to the Riverside Motel felt like a journey back in time. As they drove through the city, Sarah recognized familiar neighborhoods and landmarks from her memories with Marcus. The apartment building where they had lived together was still there, looking exactly as she remembered it. The small cafe where they used to have breakfast on Sunday mornings was still open, with the same chipped blue awning. The Riverside Motel was a modest establishment on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where people stayed when they were between homes or hiding from something. Sarah's heart pounded as she knocked on the door of room 237. Marcus opened the door immediately, as if he had been waiting by the window. He looked older than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes and gray streaks in his dark hair. But his smile was the same, warm and genuine, and seeing him felt like coming home. "Sarah," he breathed, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I can't believe you came. How are you feeling? Are you sure you should be out of the hospital?" "I had to see you," she said, surprised by how natural it felt to be in his arms again. "I need to understand what happened. Everyone keeps telling me that our relationship ended badly, but I can't remember any of it." Marcus helped her to a chair by the window and sat across from her, his expression serious. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, but you need to know the truth about David." He pulled out a manila folder filled with documents and photographs. 3 months before your accident, you hired a private investigator. You had started to suspect that David wasn't who he claimed to be. Sarah's hands trembled as Marcus showed her copies of marriage certificates, death certificates, and newspaper articles. According to the documents, David had been married twice before, and both of his previous wives had died under suspicious circumstances. His first wife, Catherine, died in a car accident 2 years into their marriage, Marcus explained. His second wife, Linda, died from complications during a routine surgery that David performed himself. In both cases, David inherited substantial life insurance policies and assets. Sarah stared at the documents in disbelief. "This can't be real. David is a doctor. He saves lives." "That's what makes it so perfect," Marcus said grimly. "No one suspects a doctor, especially one with his reputation. But look at this." He showed her a photograph of David at a hospital charity event, the same type of event where he claimed to have met Sarah. In the photo, David was standing next to a woman who looked remarkably similar to Sarah. The same height and build, the same color hair. That's Linda. His second wife, Marcus continued. The private investigator found that David has a pattern. He targets women who look similar, women who are alone or vulnerable in some way. He woos them, marries them quickly, and then... Marcus trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You're saying he kills them?" Sarah whispered. Marcus nodded solemnly. "The investigator found evidence that David has been slowly poisoning you. Small doses of medication that would cause confusion, memory problems, and eventually organ failure. Your accident might have actually saved your life by interrupting his plan." Sarah felt dizzy, and Marcus quickly moved to support her. "I know it's a lot to take in. But Sarah, you have to understand, the night of your accident, you had called me. You were scared and wanted to leave David. You had discovered something in his home office, something that proved what he was doing. You were coming to meet me when the accident happened." "What did I find?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus reached into the folder and pulled out a set of photocopied pages. "Medical records. David had been documenting your deterioration, noting how the medication was affecting you. He was treating your poisoning like a clinical study." As Sarah read through the horrifying documents, fragments of memory began to surface. She remembered feeling confused and forgetful in recent months before the accident. Memory lapses that David had attributed to stress. She remembered finding pills in her food that David claimed were vitamins. She remembered David insisting that she didn't need to see other doctors when she complained of feeling unwell. "We have to go to the police," she said, standing up shakily. Marcus shook his head. "We tried that before your accident. David is well respected in the medical community. He has friends in high places, and the evidence we have is mostly circumstantial. The police said they would look into it, but nothing came of it. Then what do we do?" Marcus took her hands in his. "We have to be smart about this. You're in a vulnerable position right now, and David has complete access to you in the hospital. We need to get you somewhere safe and gather more evidence." Sarah looked out the motel window toward the hospital in the distance, where David was probably discovering her absence. She thought about the man who claimed to be her loving husband, who brought her flowers and held her hand while she recovered. The idea that he might be a calculating killer seemed impossible, but the evidence was overwhelming. "He's going to notice I'm gone," she said. "He'll come looking for me." Marcus nodded grimly. "I know, that's why we need to move fast. There's something else, Sarah. Something the investigator discovered just before your accident. David has already picked out his next victim." Sarah's blood ran cold as Marcus pulled out another photograph from the manila folder. The image showed a young woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes, probably in her late 20s. She was wearing scrubs and had a hospital ID badge clipped to her pocket. "Her name is Rebecca Chen," Marcus explained. "She's a surgical nurse at the hospital where David works. According to the investigator's notes, David has been taking a special interest in her over the past few months. Rebecca recently went through a difficult divorce and has been working extra shifts to support her young daughter. Sarah studied the photograph, seeing herself reflected in this stranger's vulnerable situation. Does she know about David's past? No, Marcus said. And that's what makes this so dangerous. David is following the same pattern he used with you and his previous wives. He's positioning himself as her savior, offering emotional support during her difficult time. The investigator documented several instances where David has stayed late at the hospital to help Rebecca with her work, brought her coffee during long shifts, and even offered to help her find better childcare for her daughter. The weight of the situation settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. Not only was her own life in danger, but an innocent woman was being drawn into David's web. She thought about Rebecca's daughter and the devastating impact David's actions would have on their lives. We have to warn her, Sarah said firmly. Marcus nodded. That was your plan before the accident. You wanted to approach Rebecca directly. But we were worried that David might escalate his timeline if he suspected we were getting close to exposing him. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from David. Where are you? The nurses say you left the hospital. I'm worried sick. Please call me immediately. Her hands shook as she showed Marcus the message. He knows I'm gone. How much time do we have? Not much, Marcus replied, gathering the documents quickly. David is smart and resourceful. He'll probably check security cameras and start making calls to track you down. We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out our next move. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Jennifer's name. Marcus answered, putting the call on speaker. Marcus, thank God I reached you. Jennifer's voice was panicked. David just called me asking if I knew where Sarah was. He seemed really angry, not just worried. I told him I hadn't heard from her, but I don't think he believed me. He's been calling everyone who visited Sarah today. We're at the motel, Marcus said. What should we do? You need to get out of there now, Jennifer urged. I'm on my way to pick you up. There's something else you need to know. I did some digging after our conversation yesterday, and I found out that David has been asking questions about Sarah's medical records and treatment plan. He's been pushing the doctors to discharge her early, claiming she would recover better in a familiar home environment. Sarah felt sick. The thought of being alone with David in their house, dependent on him for her medication and care, was terrifying. Jennifer, can you contact Rebecca Chen? She needs to know what she's getting into. I'll try, Jennifer promised. But first, let's get you both somewhere safe. I know a place where David won't think to look for you. 20 minutes later, Jennifer arrived at the motel in her car, constantly checking her mirrors for signs they were being followed. She drove them to a small bed and breakfast about an hour outside the city, owned by her aunt, who had agreed to let them stay without asking questions. The bed and breakfast was a charming Victorian house surrounded by gardens and tall trees, the kind of place that felt worlds away from hospitals and danger. Jennifer's aunt, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman in her 60s who welcomed them warmly and showed them to adjoining rooms on the second floor. You'll be safe here, Mrs. Patterson assured them. I don't get many guests this time of year, and the house isn't listed in any online directories. Your friend Jennifer explained that you're having some family troubles. That evening, as Sarah sat by the window watching the sunset through the trees, Marcus knocked gently on her door. When she let him in, he was carrying a laptop and more documents from the investigator's files. I've been going through everything again, he said, settling into a chair beside her. I think I found something that might help us. Look at this. He showed her a bank statement from David's account, highlighting several large withdrawals made in cash over the past year. The investigator traced these withdrawals to payments made to a man named Vincent Torres. Torres has a criminal record, including assault and intimidation. It looks like David has been paying him to keep tabs on people. Sarah studied the statement, her stomach churning. You think he was having me watched? I think he was having anyone who might threaten his plans watched, Marcus replied. Including me. The investigator's notes mention that Torres was seen outside my apartment building several times in the months before your accident. A new fear gripped Sarah. Do you think David knows we're here? Before Marcus could answer, Sarah's phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and both of them stared at it as it rang persistently. I should answer it, Sarah said. If I don't, he'll know something is wrong. Marcus nodded reluctantly, and Sarah accepted the call, putting it on speaker so Marcus could hear. Sarah, thank God. David's voice was a mixture of relief and barely controlled anger. Where are you? I've been searching for you for hours. The hospital staff said you left in a taxi, but no one knows where you went. I'm sorry, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. I needed some air, and I wanted to see some familiar places to help with my memory. I'm fine. That's incredibly dangerous in your condition, David said sharply. You could have collapsed or gotten confused and lost. Where exactly are you? I'm coming to get you right now. Sarah looked at Marcus, who was shaking his head frantically. I'm with Jennifer, she lied. We're just having coffee and talking. She's helping me remember things about our friendship. There was a pause on David's end, and when he spoke again, his tone was different, more calculated. Which coffee shop? I'll meet you there. I think it's important that I'm part of these conversations about your recovery. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't name a specific location without potentially leading David to them, but she also couldn't refuse to tell him without raising more suspicion. We're just driving around, actually, she said. Jennifer thought it would help if I saw different parts of the city. We'll be back at the hospital soon. Sarah. David's voice was now cold and commanding. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your brain injury has affected your judgment, and you're not capable of making safe decisions right now. Tell me exactly where you are, or I'll have to call the police and report you as a missing person with diminished mental capacity. The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that David was showing his true nature, the controlling and manipulative side that she apparently couldn't remember. Marcus grabbed a piece of paper and quickly wrote, "Hang up. We need to move." "David, I'll call you back," Sarah said quickly. "Jennifer is saying something important about my past." She ended the call before David could respond and immediately turned off her phone. Marcus was already packing up the documents. "He's going to call in favors and use his connections to track us down," Marcus said urgently. "We need to warn Rebecca tonight and then get out of town until we can figure out how to stop him permanently." As they prepared to leave the safety of the bed and breakfast, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. David was clearly more dangerous than she had imagined, and now they had threatened his carefully constructed life. She wondered if her accident had really been an accident at all, or if David had already tried once to eliminate the threat she posed to his plans. The drive back to the city felt like descending into enemy territory. Marcus had borrowed Mrs. Patterson's old sedan to avoid using his own car, which David might recognize. Sarah wore a baseball cap and sunglasses that Jennifer had brought, simple disguises that felt inadequate against someone as resourceful as David. They arrived at the hospital just after 11 p.m., when the night shift would be in full swing, but security would be lighter. Marcus had called ahead using an untraceable phone to confirm that Rebecca Chen was working the late shift in the cardiac surgery wing. "Remember the plan?" Marcus whispered as they approached the hospital's employee entrance. "We find Rebecca, show her the evidence, and get out. If we see David or anyone who might be working for him, we abort and leave immediately." Jennifer met them at the entrance, wearing scrubs she had borrowed from a friend who worked in the maternity ward. "Rebecca's in surgery right now," she reported quietly. "But her shift ends at midnight and she usually takes a break in the staff lounge around 11:30. They made their way through the hospital corridors, avoiding the main areas where David might be found. Sarah felt strange being back in the building where she had spent weeks recovering, seeing it now as a place of danger rather than healing. The staff lounge was a small room with vending machines, a few tables, and tired-looking chairs. At 11:35, Rebecca entered, looking exhausted after what had clearly been a long surgery. She was smaller than she appeared in the photographs, with delicate features and kind eyes that reminded Sarah painfully of her younger self. "Excuse me, Rebecca." Jennifer approached her carefully. "I'm Jennifer Martinez, and this is my friend Sarah. We need to talk to you about something very important. It's about Dr. David Morrison." Rebecca looked up with surprise and what might have been embarrassment. "Oh, are you Dr. Morrison's wife? I heard about your accident. How are you feeling?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Rebecca knew about her, which meant David had been talking about his wife while simultaneously pursuing another woman. The calculated nature of his deception was breathtaking. "That's exactly what we need to talk to you about," Sarah said, sitting down across from Rebecca. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but David is not who you think he is. He's dangerous and you're in serious trouble." Rebecca's expression shifted from concern to skepticism. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Dr. Morrison has been nothing but kind to me. He's helped me through a very difficult time in my life." Marcus stepped forward and placed the manila folder on the table. Rebecca, we have evidence that David has killed 2 previous wives and was planning to kill Sarah before her accident interrupted his plans. We believe you're his next target. Rebecca stared at them as if they had lost their minds. That's insane. Dr. Morrison is one of the most respected surgeons in this hospital. He saves lives every day. Why would you make up such horrible lies about him? Sarah understood Rebecca's reaction. She remembered her own disbelief when Marcus had first shown her the evidence. Rebecca, I know how this sounds. 3 days ago, I thought David was a loving husband who was caring for me after a terrible accident. But look at these documents. She spread out the photographs and papers showing David's pattern of behavior, the suspicious deaths of his previous wives, and the evidence of poisoning. Rebecca examined the materials with growing alarm, her medical training allowing her to understand the significance of the toxicology reports and medical records. Even if this is true, Rebecca said slowly, why are you telling me? What does this have to do with me? Because you fit his pattern, Marcus explained gently. You're a vulnerable woman going through a difficult time. You're attractive, intelligent, and you work in healthcare where David can maintain regular contact with you. He's been positioning himself as your protector and friend, just like he did with Sarah and his previous victims. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see her thinking back over her recent interactions with David. He has been very supportive, she admitted. He helped me switch to a better health insurance plan for my daughter. He even offered to help me find a lawyer for my custody issues. That's how he operates, Sarah said urgently.
He identifies your needs and becomes indispensable to you.
Then, once you trust him completely, he starts isolating you from other people and slowly poisoning you while documenting your decline. As if summoned by their conversation, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the lounge. Through the small window in the door, they could see David walking past with another doctor, deep in conversation. Rebecca tensed as she saw him, and Sarah noticed the fear in her eyes. He's been asking me to have dinner with him, Rebecca whispered. Tomorrow night. He said it would be good for me to get out and talk to someone who understands the pressures of medical work. Sarah's heart raced. You can't go to that dinner. Rebecca, I think he was planning to begin poisoning me the night of my accident. If you go out with him tomorrow night, it could be the beginning of the end for you. Rebecca looked torn between disbelief and growing terror. But what am I supposed to do? I can't just avoid him. We work together. And what if you're wrong? What if this is all some kind of misunderstanding or conspiracy? Marcus leaned forward. Rebecca, we're not asking you to believe everything immediately, but we are asking you to be careful. Don't eat or drink anything David gives you. Don't go anywhere alone with him. And please consider talking to the police. We already tried talking to the police, Jennifer added. David has too many connections and the evidence is circumstantial. But if you come forward as a potential victim, it might give our case more weight. Rebecca stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. This is insane. My life is already falling apart from my divorce, and now you're telling me that someone I trusted is trying to kill me? How am I supposed to process this? Before anyone could answer, the door to the lounge opened and David walked in. He froze when he saw the group huddled around the table, his eyes immediately taking in the scattered documents and photographs. Sarah, he said, his voice carefully controlled. What a surprise to find you here. And Rebecca, I didn't expect to see you taking a break with my wife and her friends. The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah watched David's face carefully, seeing the rapid calculations behind his eyes as he assessed the situation. She noticed how his gaze lingered on the documents spread across the table, though he was too far away to read them clearly. I was just telling Rebecca about my memory problems, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jennifer thought it might help to talk to someone else in the medical field. David's smile was cold and practiced. How thoughtful of Jennifer. Rebecca, I hope they haven't been filling your head with any strange ideas. Sometimes brain injury patients can develop paranoid delusions during their recovery. The insult was delivered with such clinical detachment that Sarah felt a chill run through her. This was David's true nature, she realized, the calculating manipulator hidden beneath the caring physician facade. Rebecca looked between Sarah and David, clearly struggling with what to believe. Dr. Morrison, they've been telling me some very disturbing things about you, about your previous wives. David's mask slipped for just a moment and Sarah saw something dark and dangerous flash in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. shaking his head with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "I'm afraid Sarah's accident has affected her ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy," he said with convincing concern. "Her friends are enabling these delusions instead of encouraging her to focus on recovery. Rebecca, as a medical professional, surely you understand how dangerous it is to feed into a patient's paranoid fantasies." Sarah realized they were losing Rebecca, who was clearly confused by David's reasonable demeanor and medical authority. She made a desperate decision and pulled out her phone, showing Rebecca the text messages David had sent earlier when he was tracking her down. "Does this sound like concern or control?" she asked, letting Rebecca read David's threatening messages about calling the police and having her declared mentally incompetent. Rebecca's expression changed as she read the messages, and Sarah saw the moment when doubt crept into her eyes. David noticed it too, and his facade finally cracked completely. "I think this conversation is over," he said, his voice now carrying an unmistakable threat. "Sarah, you're coming home with me right now. As for the rest of you, I'd be very careful about spreading libelous stories about a respected member of this hospital's staff." Marcus stood up, positioning himself between David and Sarah. "She's not going anywhere with you." David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I think you'll find that Sarah is still legally my wife and under my medical care. Security will be very interested to hear that you've helped a mentally impaired patient leave the hospital against medical advice." As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway behind David. Sarah realized with growing horror that David had planned this confrontation, that he had been tracking them and was now ready to use his authority and connections to take control of the situation. The security guards stepped into the room, their hands resting casually on their radios. Sarah recognized one of them from her time as a patient, a middle-aged man named Carl who had always been friendly during his rounds. The other guard was younger, someone she didn't know, but his expression was stern and official. "Dr. Morrison," Carl said respectfully, "we got your call about your wife. Is everything all right here?" David gestured toward Sarah with what appeared to be genuine concern. "My wife suffered a severe brain injury and has been experiencing confusion and paranoid delusions. These people have encouraged her to leave the hospital against medical advice, and I'm worried about her safety." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. David's reputation and authority were working exactly as he had planned. To the security guards, she looked like a confused patient being manipulated by well-meaning but misguided friends. But Rebecca stepped forward, surprising everyone. "Actually, Carl, I think there might be more to this situation than Dr. Morrison is telling you." Her voice was shaky but determined. "I've been looking at some documents that suggest Dr. Morrison might not have his wife's best interests at heart." David's face hardened. "Rebecca, I'm disappointed that you would involve yourself in a family medical situation. This is highly inappropriate and could affect your employment here." The threat was subtle but clear, and Sarah saw Rebecca flinch. But instead of backing down, Rebecca seemed to find strength in her fear. "Carl, before you do anything, I think you should see these documents. They show a pattern of suspicious deaths connected to Dr. Morrison." Carl looked uncomfortable, clearly caught between his respect for David's medical authority and Rebecca's obvious distress. "I don't know, Rebecca. This sounds like something for the police, not hospital security." "The police have already been contacted," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "Detective Linda Rodriguez is on her way. She's been investigating Dr. Morrison's previous wives' deaths." Sarah wasn't sure if Marcus was telling the truth or bluffing, but the mention of a specific detective's name seemed to give the security guards pause. David's confident expression flickered with uncertainty for the first time. "This is ridiculous," David said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "Carl, I need you to escort my wife back to her room immediately. She needs medical supervision, and these people are clearly agitating her condition." Before Carl could respond, Jennifer spoke up. "Actually, there's something else you all should know." She pulled out her phone and showed them a recording app that was still running. "I've been recording this entire conversation. Dr. Morrison just threatened Rebecca's employment for supporting a patient's concerns about her own safety." The revelation changed the entire dynamic in the room. David realized that his threats and manipulation were now documented, and the security guards looked increasingly uncertain about their role in the situation. "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, "Sarah is not under involuntary psychiatric hold. She has the legal right to refuse treatment and leave the hospital if she chooses. Dr. Morrison cannot force her to return to his care. David's mask finally fell away completely. His face twisted with rage, and Sarah saw the dangerous man who had killed 2 wives and nearly succeeded in killing her. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Sarah belongs to me. I've invested too much time and effort in her to let her be ruined by these pathetic delusions." The chilling words hung in the air, and Sarah saw both security guards step back instinctively. Carl reached for his radio, finally understanding that this was far more serious than a simple family disagreement. "Dr. Morrison," Carl said carefully, "I think you need to step back and let us handle this situation. Maybe you should wait in your office while we sort this out." David laughed, a sound without humor that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Do you really think you can stop me? I'm a respected surgeon with connections throughout this hospital and this city. Who's going to believe the word of a brain-damaged woman and her desperate ex-boyfriend over mine?" But as David spoke, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Detective Linda Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with 2 uniformed police officers. Marcus's call to the police had apparently been real, though Sarah suspected he had contacted them before they entered the hospital. "Dr. Morrison," Detective Rodriguez said calmly, "I'd like to ask you some questions about your wife's accident and the deaths of your previous wives." David's composure cracked further. "This is harassment. I demand to speak with my lawyer immediately." "That's your right," the detective agreed. "But first, I have a warrant to search your home and office. We've received new evidence suggesting that you may have been involved in the attempted murder of your wife and the deaths of Catherine Morrison and Linda Morrison." Sarah watched David's face cycle through emotions, rage, fear, calculation, and finally a cold resignation. She realized that he was deciding whether to continue his charade or abandon it entirely. "You can't prove anything," David said finally. "Everything I did was motivated by love and medical necessity." Sarah was sick, confused, depressed. "I was trying to help her." "By poisoning her?" Detective Rodriguez asked bluntly. "By treating her mental illness," David replied smoothly. "Sometimes patients resist treatment that's in their best interest. Sometimes they need stronger intervention." The casual way he admitted to drugging her without consent made Sarah feel sick. She thought about all the time she had trusted him with her medication, her food, her care. How many months had he been slowly killing her while she believed he was helping her recover? Rebecca gasped as the full implications of David's words sank in. He was going to do the same thing to me, wasn't he? The dinner invitation, the offers to help with my problems, it was all part of his plan. David turned to Rebecca with a smile that was purely predatory. "You would have been perfect, Rebecca. Much less complicated than Sarah. She always asked too many questions, always wanted to understand her treatment. You would have been more trusting." Detective Rodriguez nodded to the uniformed officers, who moved forward to arrest David. As they read him his rights, he looked directly at Sarah with eyes full of hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," he said quietly. "You could have lived comfortably as my wife. Now you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if I'll find a way to finish what I started." The threat sent chills through Sarah, but she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. "I'd rather live in fear than die as your victim." As the police led David away, Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The immediate danger was over, but she knew David was right about one thing. This was far from finished. A man with his intelligence, resources, and connections wouldn't simply disappear into the prison system. He would find a way to continue threatening her and anyone who had helped expose him. Rebecca sank into a chair, shaking as the full reality of what she had almost walked into hit her. "I can't believe I was so close to trusting him completely. If you hadn't warned me, we're all safe now," Marcus said, though Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "The important thing is that he's been stopped before he could hurt anyone else." Detective Rodriguez approached Sarah with a gentle expression. "Mrs. Morrison, I know this has been traumatic, but we're going to need your full cooperation to build a strong case against your husband. His lawyers will be expensive and aggressive, and we need to make sure every piece of evidence is solid." Sarah nodded, understanding that her ordeal was just beginning. The legal battle ahead would be long and difficult, and David would use every resource at his disposal to discredit her testimony and escape justice. But as she looked around the room at Marcus, Jennifer, and Rebecca, she realized she wasn't facing this fight alone. For the first time since waking up in the hospital, she felt hopeful about her future. Her memory might be damaged, but her instincts and her support system were intact. The hardest part, she knew, would be rebuilding her life from the fragments of memory and identity that remained. She would have to figure out who she really was beneath the layers of David's manipulation and control. But with Marcus by her side and the truth finally exposed, she was ready to begin that journey of rediscovery. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the courtroom wearing a simple blue dress, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared to give her testimony in David's murder trial. The months between his arrest and the trial had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical examinations, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding her life and recovering her memories. The prosecution had built a strong case. The search of David's home and office had revealed a disturbing collection of medical records documenting the systematic poisoning of his wives, detailed notes about their declining health, and even video recordings of their final days. Most damning of all was David's computer, which contained research about untraceable poisons and life insurance policies for each of his victims. Sarah's memory had gradually returned in pieces, though some gaps remained permanent. She remembered the growing suspicion that had led her to hire the private investigator, the terror of discovering David's true nature, and the desperate phone call to Marcus on the night of her accident. The accident itself remained a blur, but investigators had found evidence that David had tampered with her car's brakes after she threatened to expose him. "Mrs. Morrison," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" Sarah took a deep breath and began her testimony, describing how David had swept her off her feet during a vulnerable period in her life, isolated her from friends and family, and gradually taken control of every aspect of her existence. She spoke about the memory lapses, the unexplained illnesses, and the growing sense that something was terribly wrong in her marriage. David sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, flanked by a team of high-powered lawyers. Throughout Sarah's testimony, he maintained the same calm, professional demeanor that had fooled so many people for so long. Occasionally, he would whisper something to his attorneys or make notes on a legal pad, as if this were merely another medical consultation rather than a trial for multiple murders. When the defense cross-examined Sarah, they attacked her credibility ruthlessly, focusing on her memory loss and suggesting that her testimony was influenced by false memories implanted by Marcus and the private investigator. David's lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Victoria Chen, painted Sarah as a confused, emotionally unstable woman seeking revenge against a husband who had devoted himself to her care. "Mrs. Morrison," Victoria said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you have significant gaps in your memory due to your brain injury?" "Yes," Sarah admitted, "but the memories I do have are clear and consistent with the evidence." "And isn't it true that your ex-boyfriend Marcus has been actively involved in shaping your understanding of events you can't remember?" Sarah felt the familiar anger rise in her chest. "Marcus helped me uncover the truth about what David was doing to me. He saved my life. Or did he manipulate a vulnerable woman into believing a fantasy that would reunite them?" Victoria suggested. "Isn't it possible that your so-called memories are actually suggestions planted by someone who wanted to destroy your marriage?" The defense strategy was predictable but effective. They portrayed David as a dedicated physician whose only crime was loving a troubled woman too much. They brought in character witnesses who testified about David's charitable work, his dedication to his patients, and his apparent devotion to Sarah during her recovery. But the prosecution had witnesses of their own. Rebecca took the stand and described David's calculated courtship, his offers of help that seemed too good to be true, and the growing unease she had felt about his attention. Her testimony was particularly powerful because she had no obvious motive to lie about David. Jennifer testified about the changes she had witnessed in Sarah during her marriage to David, how her friend had become increasingly isolated and dependent on her husband's guidance for even simple decisions. She described Sarah's growing paranoia in the months before the accident and the desperate quality of their final conversations. The medical examiner, who had performed the autopsies on David's previous wives, took the stand to explain how the original causes of death had been accepted because David's medical reputation made it unthinkable that he could be responsible. The presence of exotic toxins in preserved tissue samples, discovered only after Sarah's accusations prompted a more thorough investigation, painted a picture of calculated, methodical murder. Perhaps most damaging was the testimony of Dr. Margaret Ellis, a forensic psychiatrist who had analyzed David's personal writings and video recordings. She described a classic psychopathic personality, charming and manipulative on the surface, but completely lacking in empathy or genuine emotional connection to others. The defendant's writings show a clinical fascination with the process of death, Dr. Ellis explained. He documented his wife's declining health with the same detachment he might show when studying laboratory animals. There's no evidence of grief, regret, or emotional attachment. To him, these women were subjects in an experiment rather than human beings he claimed to love. When David finally took the stand in his own defense, Sarah was struck by how convincing he could still be. He spoke eloquently about his love for his wives, his dedication to medicine, and his heartbreak over Sarah's accusations. He had explanations for every piece of evidence. The poisons were for legitimate medical research. The detailed notes were part of his commitment to providing the best possible care, and the life insurance policies were simply responsible financial planning. "I devoted my life to healing people," David said, his voice breaking with apparent emotion. "The idea that I would deliberately harm the women I loved is so contrary to everything I believe that I can barely comprehend how these accusations arose." But during cross-examination, the prosecutor slowly dismantled David's carefully constructed facade. She pressed him on inconsistencies in his story, questioned his explanations for the physical evidence, and forced him to confront the overwhelming pattern of suspicious deaths surrounding him. The most powerful moment came when the prosecutor asked David to explain his recorded statement about Sarah belonging to him and his investment in her. David's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand the pressures of marriage to someone with mental health issues," he snapped. "Sometimes you have to take control for their own good. Sometimes people don't know what's best for them." The admission hung in the courtroom like a confession. In trying to justify his control over Sarah, David had revealed the mindset that had driven him to murder. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts of murder in the first degree and attempted murder. As the judge read the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, David showed no emotion at all. He simply nodded as if receiving routine medical test results. After the trial, Sarah walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine, feeling lighter than she had in months. Marcus was waiting for her on the courthouse steps, along with Jennifer and Rebecca, who had become an unexpected friend through their shared experience. "It's really over," Rebecca said, squeezing Sarah's hand. "He can't hurt anyone else." Sarah nodded, but she knew the healing process was just beginning. She had already started therapy to help process the trauma and recover more of her memories. She was also working with a support group for domestic abuse survivors, sharing her story to help other women recognize the warning signs of controlling relationships. Her relationship with Marcus was slowly rebuilding, but they were taking it carefully. Both of them had been changed by their experience, and they needed time to rediscover who they were as individuals before they could fully commit to being together again. Sarah had moved into a small apartment across town, a place that belonged entirely to her with no history of David's presence. She was learning to make decisions for herself again, from what to eat for breakfast to what career path to pursue. Every choice felt significant after years of having her autonomy slowly stripped away. Some evenings, she would sit by her window and think about the woman she had been before David entered her life, and the woman she was becoming in his absence. Her memories of that earlier self were still incomplete, but she was discovering that she didn't need to recover her old identity entirely. She could create a new one, built on her own choices and strengthened by her survival. The small scars on her wrists from the IV lines had faded, but they served as reminders of how close she had come to never waking up at all. Every morning when she saw them, she was grateful for the second chance she had been given, and determined to use it wisely. David was gone from her life forever, locked away where he could never again manipulate vulnerable women or use his medical knowledge to harm instead of heal. But more importantly, Sarah had reclaimed herself. She was no longer the confused woman who had awakened in a hospital bed surrounded by strangers. She was someone who had fought for the truth, survived an attempt on her life, and helped save other potential victims. As she looked toward the future, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic. Her memory might never be completely whole, and the trauma would always be part of her story. but she had proven to herself that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. The woman who had emerged from David's careful psychological manipulation was someone she was proud to be. I,